to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Now, we don't really have anyone in the chat just yet, but we'll start and proceed as though people will show up. But, all right. So, on this stream, we're going to be discussing primarily Tolkien's relationship with World War I. Now, I've kind of done this before in a few times, but this is the first time you're present for it, Dan. And
hello and greetings.
And this will be your first time reading the shocking fifth letter of Tolkien, which so far I found the most shocking letter of his entire life. But a little background first, because there is some history here that needs to be explored before we get into the letter, because, you know, there's an entire background to it, and to Tolkien's relationship with a lot of his peers that he loved right before World War I, and even a bit to World War I. Now, as everyone knows, World War I was started in a way that was described once as, I forget the assassin's name, but with a single shot, he killed dozens of millions of people throughout Europe, which very apt. And the Archduke's death caused the two main sets of alliances, the Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia, to band together against the forces of Deutschland, Germany, because Germany had been getting increasingly aggressive throughout the 19th century and even a bit of the 18th century. And this made at least France and Russia a little nervous. Britain got a little arrogant and dumb for a while until she smartened up and realized, oh, yeah, my interests are actually being attacked. I should maybe defend those. So Britain went through a really stupid period. And this is really what brought down the British Empire to an extent. In a way, the German and the British empires destroyed each other. And the thing is, one of the worst battles in the history of the war was the Battle of La Bataille de la Somme, or the Battle of the Somme. And this battle was supposed to have divisions of Frenchmen joining the British, but the Franks got preoccupied with rear guard action and with having to fight at a separate fortress, where they too were getting slaughtered, sadly. And they had their own, well, they had several equivalents to the Bataille de la Somme. So that, like, in World War I and II, I think that they were almost some of the worst victims. They were the nation most abused by Germany to an extent.
It was part of the primary battleground.
Yeah, in both wars. And speaking personally, I hope that no war is ever waged again on French soil, because
I'm inclined to agree.
At least not at that scale, because like France a souffert assez. She suffered enough. At least that's what I think. As to the British, because the French could not show up, this thus became a purely Frankish affair. Not Frankish, but British affair. And it said that on the first day, the upper command was completely incompetent and said, this won't be that difficult. At which point, 20,000 men died on that first day in the first push. And this out of 120,000 men pressing forward. Wow. That's, yeah. That's where, now as to the Germans, in total at the Somme, they would lose 450,000, while the British and the Frank would lose 650,000 over the course of the entire long battle, as this became a war of attrition. And it would not be until the year of 1918 that the, one second.
Wow.
And in 1918, sorry about that. In 1918, the Allies would adopt a more mobile strategy. Now, as to Tolkien, he would return 4 months to England, 4 months after his arrival, I think, over in at the battle. Due to I think he returned in 1916 or 17, and yeah, it looks like it was 17, and he returned due to trench fever, and was waylaid in England for the remainder of the war. As to his friends, well, actually, let me just double check something real quick. I thought I had written it down. And let me see. It's, let me see. Oh, he spent 4 months in the trenches at the Bataille de la Somme. Yeah, from July to November 1916. Okay, so yeah, my first guess was right. This was a big deal. Let's be honest. This was a very, very, very big deal. And like Tolkien, I'm just going to quickly share this. Tolkien really went through a lot. And the thing is, his friends, whom had formed the Barovian Society, I think it is,
Tea Club and Barovian Society.
Yep. Now the big four were Christopher Wiseman, Jeffrey Bates Smith, and Robert Gilson, and J.R.R. Tolkien, as seen in this photo that we're kind of emphasizing here. And all four were very, very brilliant men. They were very, very smart young men, all with very beautiful souls, apparently, and hearts. Sadly, now there was more members, quite a few more, and I'm mainly going to go through the casualty list. Now, most of them had been met. Tolkien met most of them at King Edward's School in Birmingham. Now, these Birmingham boys would end up, going for a rough patch in World War I. Now, interestingly, what's a little known fact is that Vincent Trout, who was one of the founding members, died in 1912. He was the first one to die. And he was the predecessor of Jeffrey Smith on this little club. So already in 12, there was already a casualty. That aside, Thomas Barnsley, one of the members of the expanded club, would die at Ypres rather than at Le Somme. He survived Le Somme, only to die in the next battle.
That's tragic.
Yeah, and hello and greetings to Spectre and Terra Incognita. Always a pleasure. Now, we were just kind of going over a bit of World War I. You've got, in turn, Ralph Payton and Jeffrey Smith, according to my notes, along with Rob Gilson, were to die in the Battle of the Somme. Now, Payton was an expanded member, and Gilson and Smith and Payton, they all died, I think, in 1916, according to my notes. And that's just shocking. In the span of just a single year or so, Tolkien lost pretty much all his friends. And he was a second lieutenant of the Lancashire Fusiliers. And in the end, only one other survivor. There'd be only one other survivor of the core founding members of this club. And that would be Christopher Wiseman. And Wiseman would not really have much of a relationship with Tolkien after this war, sadly, and was a deeply traumatized individual. And he became headmaster of Queen's College at Taunton. As to the nature of the TCBS, they're primarily a literary club of poets. And Smith was the most notable poet of them all at first. I personally think Tolkien is probably the most talented, but I'm biased. And Smith's death is just horrifying. He was hit by shrapnel and took 4 days to die. And because of the Hippocratic Oath, none of the doctors would deny him medical service, so they kept him alive as long as possible, which just simply worsened his agony and extended it.
And I can't blame the medical doctors.
They took an oath.
They took an oath and they wanted to save him, but it was hard to make sure that his last days were...
Yeah, there was nothing they could do. I can't even imagine. Like, it's just horrifying. And I'm going to close this picture and switch them because, well, there's another picture I want to share with you guys because I better zoom in because this is where Baton wrote a very, very beautiful letter. I'm going to read it, and then Dan's going to move on to reading the fifth letter for the first time. And every once in a while, I'm going to pause him just so that I could post on the screen the actual bits of the letter because I couldn't get the whole thing. I had to turn it into several image files. My chief consolation is that if I am scuppered tonight, there will still be left a member of our school group to voice what I dreamed and what we all agreed upon. For the death of one of its members cannot, I am determined, dissolve the group. Death can make us loathsome and helpless as individuals, but it cannot put an end to the immortal four. May God bless you, my dear John Ronald, and may you say things I have tried to say long after I am not there to say them, if such be my lot. And Jeffrey Smith's works, his poems, would be compiled by Tolkien and published posthumously as The Spring Harvest, with Tolkien writing a preface to it. And there's a beautiful scene in the Tolkien movie where Tolkien talks to Jeffrey's mother, which, like, I can't even imagine what that conversation must have been like historically.
Heart-wrenching.
Yeah. It's that's just like you read any at all about World War One, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like what did these people, like how did these people emotionally survive this? Because this is just shocking. Now, I'm going to quickly change to the letter because Dan's going to start reading for us. I have to zoom in for you guys. There. Hopefully this is good enough. And yep, seems to be. So go ahead, Dan.
While they were at King Edward's School, Birmingham, in 1911, Tolkien and three friends, Robert Gilson, Jeffrey Smith, and Christopher Wiseman, formed themselves into an unofficial and semi-secret society, which they called the T.C.B.S, initials standing for Tea Club and Barovian Society, an allusion to their fondness for having tea in the school library illicitly and in barrow stores near the school. Since leaving King Edward's, the TCBS had kept in close touch with each other, and in December 1914 had held a council at Wiseman's London home, following which Tolkien had begun to devote much energy to writing poetry. The results, he believed, of the shared ideals and mutual encouragement of the TCBS. Wiseman was now serving in the Navy. Gilson and Smith were sent out to the Somme, and Tolkien arrived on that battlefield as battalion signaling officer to the 11th Lancashire Fusiliers just as the Allied offensive of July 1st was beginning. On that day, Rob Gilson was killed in action, but news of his death did not reach the other members of the T.C.B.S. for some weeks. Jeffrey Smith sent Tolkien a note about it and later passed him a letter from Christopher Wiseman.
The note being what I had read earlier. Now, Rob Gilson dying essentially on the first day of his arrival is... I had forgotten that detail. Now, this letter is dated to August 12th, 1916. Now, I'm going to just bring up the next part of the letter. That way, we can carry on, but give me one moment as it kind of takes a minute to load this through and whatnot. I do thank our dear audience for their patience. All right, here we go.
August 12th, 1916, 11th Lancashire Fusiliers, DEF, France. My dear old Geoffrey, thank you indeed for Christopher's letter. I have thought much of things since, most of them incommunicable thoughts, until God brings us together again, if it be only for a space. I don't agree with Chris, although of course he does not say much. I agree most heartily, of course, with the part of you underlined, but strangely enough, not in the least now with the part I marked and commented. I went out into the woods. We are in camp again from our second bout of trenches, still in the same old area as when I saw you last night and also the night before and sat and thought. I cannot get away from the conclusion that it is wrong to confound the greatness which Rob has won with the greatness which he himself doubted. He himself will know that I am only being perfectly sincere, and I am in no way unfaithful to my love for him, which I only realize now more and more daily that he has gone from the fore. When I say that I now believe that if the greatness which we three certainly meant as more than holiness or nobility alone, is really the lot of the T.C.B.S., then the death of any of its members is but a bitter winnowing of those who were not meant to be great, at least directly. God grant that this does not sound arrogant. I feel humbler enough in truth and immeasurably weaker and poorer now. The greatness I meant was that of a great instrument in God's hands, a mover, a doer, even an achiever of great things, a beginner at the very least of large things.
Hold, Dan. I'm just going to move things around because, we got to shift the screen. And go.
The greatness which Rob has found is in no way smaller. For the greatness I meant and tremblingly hope for as ours is valueless unless steeped with the same holiness of courage, suffering, and sacrifice, but is of a different kind. His greatness is, in other words, now a personal matter with us, of a kind to make us keep July 1st as a special day for all the years God may grant to any of us, but only touches the T.C.B.S. on that precise side which perhaps it is possible was the only one that Rob really felt. Friendship to the nth power. What I meant and thought Chris meant, and am almost sure you meant, was that the T.C.B.S. had been granted some spark of life, certainly as a body, if not singly, that was destined to kindle a new light, or what is the same thing, rekindle an old light in the world, that the T.C.B.S. was destined to testify for God and truth in a more direct way even then by laying down its several lives in this war, which is for all the evil of our own side, with large view of good against evil. So far, my chief impression is that something has gone crack. I feel just the same to both of you. Nearer, if anything, and very much in need of you. I am hungry and lonely, of course, but I don't feel a member of a little complete body now. I honestly feel that the T.C.B.S. has ended, but I am not at all sure that it is not an unreliable feeling that will vanish, like magic perhaps when we come together again. Still, I feel a mere individual at present, with intense feelings more than ideas, but very powerless. Of course, the T.C.B.S. may have been all dreamt, and its work in the end be done by 3 or 2 or 1 survivor, and a part of the others be trusted by God to that of the inspiration which we do know we all got and get from one another. To this I now pin my hopes and pray God that the people chosen to carry on the T.C.B.S. may be no fewer than we 3.
Hold. We've got one last part, and you can continue.
I do, however, dread and grieve about it, apart from my own personal longings, because I cannot abandon yet the hope and ambitions, incoherent and cloudly I know, that first became conscious at the Council of London. That council was, as you know, followed in my own case with my finding a voice for all kinds of pent-up things and a tremendous opening up of everything for me. I have always laid that to the credit of the inspiration that even a few hours of the 4 always brought to all of us. There you are. I have sat solemnly down and tried to tell you dryly just what I think. I have made it sound very cold and distant. And if it is incoherent, that is due to being written due to its being written at different sittings amongst the noise of a very boring company mess. Send it on to Chris if you think it worthwhile. I do not know what is to be our move next or what is in store. Rumor is as busy as the universal weariness of all this war allows it to be. I wish I could know where you are. I make a guess, of course. I could write a huge letter, but I have lots of jobs on.
The Brigadier Sergeant Officer.
The Brigadier Sergeant Officer is after me for a confabulation, and I have 2 rows to have with the quartermaster in a detestable 6:30 parade, 6:30 p.m. of a sunny Sabbath. Write to me when you get the ghost of a chance. Yours, John Ronald.
I don't think Jeffrey got the letter. He was already dead.
Yeah, that is probably the saddest part.
And the letter itself strikes me as being, as Tolkien said, he's gone crack. There is an incoherent element to it, but he's a man clutching at the straws in his life, sadly. Like, the previous letters to Edith were typically pretty cheerful and very loving, and he's a happy young man, content with life. But here, it is probably the saddest letter I ever read in my life. And I've read some of the Howard letters now, where Howard talks about wanting to kill himself. But Tolkien's letter there, he was not a man prone to depressions. That letter is he just strikes me as utterly broken in some ways.
There's part of it that
I think, when he says, like, I feel as a mere individual, I think he got, on some level, a sense that the T.C.B.S. were broken to an extent, at least physically, like that. There was a sense that this death was was pretty final. That aside, I would argue the T.C.B.S. were to live on in Tolkien himself.
One one part I felt when reading that was it feels like he's still coping, still trying to.
Oh yeah,
It's still fresh in his mind. Part of him has detached in order to try to cope with what happened.
yeah. I found that he didn't really. He wanted to detach, but it didn't strike me as though he were all that properly detached. You know what I mean? Like he struck me as he wants to be detached. You know, like he wants to be able to analyze this and deal with the problem analytically and intelligently, but he isn't. He is grieving and he is brokenhearted about it. So it is, in the words of Spectre in our chat, very sad. It's just
Like he's trying to grip to hope.
but there is no hope because Tolkien was to deal with the very worst suffering a human being could potentially deal with. And strangely, and yet in a very inspiring way, he came out the other side strong, heroic, and ultimately, like, even kinder in some ways, I imagine, than he was before. Not that he wasn't kind before, but it's just he came out of it at his core the same human being he was going in, a good young man and an incredible artist and poet. So yeah, like this is where now last year we had done something to honor November 11th on our History Corner channel. This year we decided to do it over here, but as this is a fantasy channel, we can't spend the entire time just discussing Tolkien as a veteran, but I do think that it was necessary to kind of approach that. I hope our viewers understand. And on the other hand, I think that you can see parts of Tolkien's sorrow and what he endured in the Silmarillion at a few points, like the Hill of Corpses from the Children of Húrin. That's not the way it's described in it and the art looks like. That's pure World War One, and it's a horrifying scene. And yeah, as Terra Incognita says in the chat, from schoolboys to soldiers. And like you and I are artists and writers, and so to us it's like it's also from schoolboys to martyrs in a way, because it's just this is just this is horrifying.
There's a reason why a while back I once said I would not want to be a hero, because to be a hero is to suffer
enormously. Yeah,
and the soldiers back in World War One
were all heroes. Yeah,
and they suffered an incredibly.
Yeah, far more than what I think people today can imagine. But this might sound strange, but there's also something beautiful about just how strong these men were from World War One and Two. Just how strong could they be to endure what they did? That is incredible. Although let's hope that in the next few years we don't have to endure the same amount of sorrows, because like the 20th century was one of the most atrocious in human history.
Traumatizing.
Yep. So yeah. Anyways, Spectre. Yeah, he commented, as a history nerd, he always thought that the First World War should be studied more. I do agree. I'm more a medieval and ancient history guy, but I fully agree that the First and Second World Wars should be taught more. Then again, I'm of the opinion that maybe history, we should start teaching 2 history courses starting in pre-kindergarten. One being and constantly go over and over again First and Second World Wars, starting in pre-kindergarten, and also teach ancient history and classics and whatnot, starting when when children are like 3. Only because I think that we need to learn these 2 world wars and to honor what those who were lost, but also to retain culturally like the memory of ancient history, because we don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past.
And we need to appreciate the sacrifices made for us.
Yeah, and they didn't just die for future generation. They died for, like, people on all sides died for their culture, their civilization to an extent. And this is something that we do have to bear in mind. We should probably honor, like when I said, I mean like ancient Greek, Latin, like over here in the West could be taught and whatnot. Okay, so these days it's mostly the Second World War that's getting taught. Okay, the First World War out to be. I just think that the 2 world wars and maybe the Prussian War that was the
Precursor
to this war, out to be taught as a package, starting in pre-kindergarten. Meanwhile, going back to Rome. Although in Asia, maybe they should instead teach ancient Han history and whatnot, because like Rome is not exactly relevant to Asia as much.
People don't have an appreciation of history.
Yeah. Sadly, that is often the case. That's aside. On another note, we're gonna move away from history and back to fantasy, because honestly, this is a heavy topic, and I think Tolkien would have wanted us to at least honor his literature, as there's a lot to honor, and I think it'd be disrespectful in some ways to the T.C.B.S. and their sacrifices if we didn't discuss, in some ways, what they personally felt to be the most important thing in the world to them: art and poetry. So, without further ado, let's get started on the art and literature side of things. So, okay. Now, last time I had done a over-analyzing of the the silmarillion, and I had made it, I think, to the Anadune, or Western Essie, Numenore, in the High Eldarin tongue. I made it to this part of the paragraph. Now, what this means is that this is where I'm at here when it comes to over-analyzing the Silmarillion. Now, Dan's not yet reached this point in the Silmarillion. We've had to slow down the Silmarillion podcast to tackle other projects, especially with the one mega stream we did the other day with World of Conan. That one was pretty long. And yeah, I still don't know how I made it through that. No offense. While having the and making through that, I don't know how I did. But anyways, this part is mostly a background to what I'm going to get to in a minute, but this was the beginning of the people that in the Grey Elven speech are called the Dunedain, the Númenóreans, kings among men. And that just reminded me already of the one song of Queen, Princes of the Universe. Great song. But they did not thus escape from the doom of death that Ilúvatar had set upon all mankind. And they were mortal still, though their years were long and they knew no sickness. Ere the shadow fell upon them. Therefore they grew wise and glorious, and in all things more like to the firstborn than any other of the kindreds of men. And they were taller than the... Okay. Now I'm reading directly from the picture, so that means I have to move to the next tab. Let me just check. Oh, and howdy, Laurelin. Let me just make sure, because the title of some of these files, I did not... Oh, okay. I'm going to go over to this. All right. I'm trying to... the tallest of the sons of Middle Earth, and the light of their eyes were like the bright stars. Right. All right. So I guess I didn't do that. All right. So we're now going to move to... All right. Here's the part. And I'm going to zoom in so, I could read it. Of old, the chief city and haven of Numenor was in the midst of its western coast, and it was called Andunier, because it faced the sunset. But in the midst of the land was a mountain tall and steep, and it was named the Meneltarma, the pillar of heaven. And upon it was a high place that was hallowed to Eru Ilúvatar, and it was open and unroofed. And no other temple or fane was there in the land of the Numenorians. Now, in Tolkien's story, the characters don't really worship in a church or in a traditional way that is recognizable to even pagan religions, because, they don't... There is no church mass, so to speak, whether in the Catholic sense or not. And it is almost reminiscent of China, just in that their, I think, feng shui ceremonies out near the mountains, and that's what it kind of reminds me of. But Meneltarma, being the pillar of heaven, is reminiscent of several stories from the Bible. I'll just quickly get those out of the way. Mount Sinai from the Old Testament.
Just thinking that one.
But for mythology, it reminds me of Mount Olympus in a way. And now, as we know, you have Andunier right here. And yeah, this is the map of Numenor. I think it's Dan's first time seeing this. It's a star-shaped island, as you can see.
Yeah, it's my first time. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, Meneltarma is here, as the text says, in the middle of, the island, almost dead set in the middle, at the center. And it's here where the Numenorians would hold 3 ceremonies a year honoring Eru Ilúvatar. And these rituals, let me just go through my notes. Oh, wrong page. I'm just quickly looking for... yeah. It was in the Fall of Numenor book, which I've been reading through. I'm not yet finished. I'm about almost half done. And all right, the 3 ceremonies are Eru Kiarme, I think it is, on the first days of spring, Eru Laitale in midsummer, Eru Hantale at the end of August. Not August, but autumn. So they would go up to the summit of the mountain, which was fairly flat, and honor Eru Ilúvatar there in such a way that they would give Thanksgiving for essentially life. So they were pretty grateful for, him creating them and everything. This was before they became fairly, how shall I put it, consumed with ingratitude. That said, let me just try to find the next part. All right. So that's 92. All right. So let me shift over to the text again. And here we go. Now, we have unroot. Well, that's a continuation of a previous part, which I'll just quickly check in on. Let's see. And upon it was a high place that was hallowed to Eru Luvatar. Yeah. And it was open and unroofed. And no other temple or fane was there in the land of the Númenóreans. Yeah. At the feet of the mountain were built the tombs of the kings, and hard by upon a hill was Armenelos, fairest of cities, and there stood the tower and the citadel that was raised by Elros, son of Eorendil, whom the Valar appointed to be the first king of the Dunedain. So I do wonder if they maybe sent someone like Eonwë, the Herald of Manwë, to crown him. Because in The Lord of the Rings, at the end, you have Aragorn is shown a great honor when Gandalf, Olorin, crowns him. So I wonder if there was a similar ritual for the first king of the Númenóreans. Anyways, I'll just quickly check the chat. Okay. Nothing to see here. But at the foot of the mountain were built the tombs of the kings. Now, I think it's Clueless Fangirl who once commented that this is a little, in a spooky way, reminiscent of the Valley of the Kings of Egypt.
Very likely, because in many cultures, the death of a king
was a grand affair. Now, the Númenóreans grew to detest death and fear it in time, and they built greater estates and palaces for the dead than they did for the living. In that regard, it's reminiscent of Egypt, I think, with the pyramids.
And if you want to go into a very dark way, you take a look at China. The one city. Oh, what is it?
The Forbidden City?
The Forbidden City, yeah.
Well, that was built in the Ming period, I think, or the Qing period. That's more. That had nothing to do with death. That was about the living. The living emperor lived there, and you're punished with death if you snuck in. But there is the Mercury underground city of Shi Huangdi.
That's the one I was.
That's not the Forbidden City. That's a Mercury tomb. Yeah, that's pretty spooky. But I've seen pictures of it. It's pretty spooky. Now, there's a lot of historic sites I'd love to see in China, but that's one of them part of me doesn't want to. It's so spooky. Anyways, it does look pretty impressive and incredible, especially with the terracotta soldiers. But it's spooky. At the foot of the mountain, to the southeast, I believe, there was the city of Armenelos, which was said to be the fairest of the city. Now, and there stood the tower and the citadel that was raised by Elros. So he built the first real citadel or palace, one could say, of this society here at Armenelos, right to the southeast of Meneltarma. So in that regard, this is a defining moment for the history of Middle-earth, because this is when the true founding of Númenor, to an extent, can be traced. Yes, there's his coronation, but it is here where, Elros begins to establish the power of the King of Númenor and establish his position amongst the Western SE people. So in that regard, it's an incredibly important place. And it took Elros probably about 50 years to bring people over to Númenor. And at the start, it was maximum numbers, according to Tolkien's notes, about 10,000 people, men and women from Middle-earth, who got on about between 150 and 300 boats to get to, and they're pretty small boats, according to the Fall of Númenor, which has some details about these boats and on the men who crewed them and whatnot. So in that regard, it's pretty interesting. That said, many of them who departed were believed deceased. And 6 centuries later, the descendants would go, "Oh my gosh, you were alive?" when they returned, but the Numenorians would at first come to seeking almost friendship and brotherhood with the men of Middle-earth, who moved and pleased to see them, welcome them. And that was centuries before the men of Middle-earth of Numenor would return and would, come as conquerors eventually. That said, I'll just go to move on with the text, and we'll just, I wish I was a little faster at this than I am, but the thing is, I'm not like some incredible YouTubers who could do this at like super speed. There are some who move so fast with moving between the images with the share screen thing and whatnot. It's incredible. If you look at the Philosopher Games, that dude he moves like lightning. Him and Redbook are just so fast during live streams. I think we have more in common to an extent with Girl Next Gondor, and just we tend to move a little slower. We're not Indie Geek, Philosopher Games, or Redbook. They're super fast. All right, that aside. Now, Elros and Elrond, his brother, were descended from the three houses of the Edain, but in part also both from the Eldar and the Maiar. Now, the Eldar, as you all know, is the term for the firstborn of Eru Ilúvatar. That is to say, the elves. And the Maiar are the lesser divine angelic spirits of Valinor, of Aman, created by Eru at the start of time. And some Maiar are stronger than some Valar, and some Maiar are wiser than some of the Valar. But the Valar have their own ranking system and whatnot that, and I'm just saying, kind of, it's mysterious and it's beyond mortal comprehension to a large extent. So that aside, for Idril of Gondolin and Luthien, daughter of Melian, were their foremothers. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that Tolkien does, that the divine side of it is on the mother side that all the divine and the elvish heritage comes from. Idril of Gondolin was the daughter of Turgon, himself the son of Fingolfin, the greatest king of the Noldor. So you've got, well, actually, maybe I should say second, because Gil-galad kind of was a thing, but I mean, he was pretty great. Anyway, well, maybe tied in first place, but Idril, married Tuor, and after that you had Luthien, meanwhile, who was to marry Beren, and everyone knows about that great quest. I love that story. She is such a great character, Luthien. Anyways, but her mom was Melian, who was a Maiar who had wed Thingol, a great Sindarin king. So it's always on the mother's side. There's something there that Tolkien's commenting on about things, and all three of these ladies end up carrying the divine feminine almost in the literal sense throughout the entire narrative of Middle-earth. Tolkien's really emphasizing the strength of and the specialness of motherhood here, it seems. I'm not trying to get too Freudian, but I wonder if there's some of his love for his mother, whom he did adore. And because you got to bear in mind, he was very close to his mother before she died. And she died when he was very, very young. I believe when he was prepubescent. And she was someone who I think was one of them that introduced him to some old stories and was very, very concerned with his education. And she converted to Catholicism right when he was young, and this was a very important moment in Tolkien's life. So, and Tolkien also revered his surrogate father, adoptive father, the priest, who was, I think, his mom's confessor and good friend. That said, I wonder if there's something of his love for his mother here, but also his love for Edith shining through these the emphasis on mothers and women being the source of strength and this divinity.
If you look at Catholic cultures, motherhood is a very important trait.
Yeah.
And for example, if you look at French culture,
Oh yeah, Marianne and
Mary,
Jeanne. Well, Jeanne was not a mother, but yeah, there's a lot of emphasis on femininity and women throughout the history of France. With women either being, I mean, no offense, the source of all the woos with some of the queens, such as, well, or princesses such as Isabelle, who married Edward II, like, or they were the source of all hope and rescuers of France. I would argue Beltrade, I think it is, Charlemagne's mom, did a lot to save her country, and saved it from civil war. At one point, when Charlemagne was in his more impulsive days and really revved up against Carloman, you look at several of the queen dowagers of French history, and Jeanne d'Arc, of course. So yeah, but England and in Scotland also had both good and bad female leaders and figures. So motherhood does play a large role here. The Valar indeed may not withdraw the gift of death, which comes to men from Iluvatar. Yeah, we have to look at this like Tolkien was looking at death here in the narrative as a gift from Eru Iluvatar, where they are not bound to Arda as the Eldar are. So, men get a better deal, a sweeter deal. We get true immortality of soul, whereas the elves don't. The elves don't know what's going to happen to them. But it's as Girl Next Door once said, the hope that the Eldar have is that since the Eldar married two of their great princesses to, mortal men, that everybody's one big happy family, and, mortal men and dwarves might put in a good word for them. If Eru Iluvatar and the Valar. Who could blame them? They don't want to disappear. Not complete. They don't want to disappear completely. So we then get to, thank you, Spectre, for blocking and reporting those bots. I honestly didn't expect to see any today. Honestly, we're such a small channel. I'm surprised they even popped up. Now, okay, we're nearing the end of this stream, so that's kind of good. But first, let's carry on. Felvin, Iluvatar gave to them the judgment. They judged that to the sons of Eärendil should be given the choice of their own destiny. And Elrond chose to remain with the firstborn, and to give him the life of the firstborn was granted. Now, I've done a video where I said, I wonder if Elrond regrets his choice and maybe misses his brother, but I was corrected, and to an extent, with Red Book saying, well, I think he more misses Celebrian. Now, I still think to an extent he might miss Elros, but I think that my thinking has changed a little. I do think he kind of regrets his choice, but with his marriage to Celebrian and the fathering of his 3 great children, I think that the regret kind of got put behind him to a large extent. He does still miss his twin, but I think that Elrond understood with a certain amount of foreknowledge that one of them would have to make the sacrifice of choosing to be one of the firstborn. So this is Elrond making a very complex decision, and not one lightly taken. So here, and on one hand, I do think there was a certain fear, but there was also a certain wisdom. They could intermingle. They're not mutually exclusive from one another to an extent. This is a very complex moment in the Legendarium, and it should not be read as being very simple. Excuse me, my voice is starting to crack. But I also like to overanalyze this moment because Elrond's one of my favorite characters. And I like that we see the birth of his ancestors through to his birth, through to his messed up childhood, to his adulthood, to his, almost senior years in his sailing into the West. But to Elros, who chose to be a king of men, still a great span of years was allotted, many times that of the men of Middle-earth. And all his line, the kings and lords of the royal house, had long life, even according to the measure of Númenóreans. But Elros lived 500 years and ruled the Númenóreans 400 years and 10. For 410 years, Elros reigned as king. He was the greatest monarch of all the Númenóreans.
That's quite a few candles on the birthday cake.
Oh, yeah, there's no cake anymore. It melted under the
bonfire.
Yeah, the bonfire that was his birthday candles. Yeah.
And we see that a lot in mythological scripts.
Yeah.
We see that in the Bible, of course.
But we also see it in the Kojiki with in Shintoism and in Islam. Yeah,
the mythical
lived king or messiah.
The emperors of Japan.
Oh, yeah, in that regard. Yeah, with Jimmu Tenno and his immediate descendants. Yeah. And you also have Roman mythology, which approached this with some of the Roman kings in the myths being almost 100 years old or over 100 years old in some cases. But here we also get a bit of a reference to Cassius Dio, the famous Roman historian, to an extent. And Cassius Dio once said that our country descends from an age of gold and silver into one of iron and rust. And he was making reference there to the post Marcus Aurelius era of Commodus through to the Severan dynasty, which was itself one of the worst dynasties in Roman history. They did as much damage as Commodus did to Rome. So that these mad emperors literally drove an unbeatable empire into the ground, happily and willingly, just out of self-indulgence. And that's often the way it goes with empires, sadly. That said, my point is here, we have Elros who's a golden king in a way, and like this golden age lasts for about 600 years or so, with Tar Aldarion being another great king. So like up until, well, actually probably a bit more than 600 years. Basically, this golden period lasts until the end of Aldarion's reign. Then we get maybe an age of silver, so to speak, that lasts till the age of the end of Tar Ministir's reign. So, and I'm arguing here more in the context of Númenórean morality and how well they were able to build an empire without cracking some eggs, so to speak. Now, the real Golden Empire, in terms of the physical sense, would be the post-Tar-Kiryatan reign, which was not a great time, because the Númenóreans began to get arrogant and think that they ought to be treated as gods, or even become gods themselves. So, in that regard, we get a decline on the part of the kings of Númenor. Their lifespans begin to decline rapidly in comparison to their ancestors. So, but Elros himself made a decision that his descendants later resented, because he said, I'd rather be a mortal man, doomed to die, than to be an elvish immortal. And his descendants don't even realize that they would not even be born had he chosen to be immortal. They wouldn't. almost none of them would be born. But for his decision. And yet they resent it. It's very irrational. And it's just, yeah. That aside, in the meantime, you've got Gil-galad, who's establishing his kingdom over in Middle-earth, a shadow of the kingdoms of the elves that once ruled over Beleriand. And even he kind of forgets about the Númenóreans till 600 years later when they first show up for a trading mission and just for exploration. And, you know, oh, and real quick, the Númenóreans, when they first meet the mortal men, they teach them things such as how to better farm, how to grind grain in order to make better bread. And they also teach them language and literacy because they had lost all these things. They basically restore to them their civilization. And in some ways, humorously, the men of Middle-earth will someday build a civilization and remind the Númenóreans of their own civilization, in the context that the Númenóreans kind of lose a huge chunk of their own civilization to a large extent with the fall of Númenor itself. So that's the survivors and the colonists and the merchants who had moved to Middle-earth and established the trade towns there, who end up kind of restoring Númenorian culture to the Númenóreans. So in a way, there's give and take here, a lot of giving between the two groups. But as to living 500 years, that's a long time. That's a long time. But this is probably the best time of Númenorian history. And it's interesting that he didn't actually establish trade missions to go back to Middle-earth. He mostly just sent people back just to get more people to come along. They also apparently, there were animals in Númenor, most of them friendly towards men, but apparently there were no dogs, so dogs had to be imported. That's mentioned in the Fall of Númenor.
That's interesting. Yeah,
so Númenor was not a beautiful place to live till those dogs were imported. I say that as a dog person. I mean, what a horrible place to live. What kind of island was Ilúvatar and the Valar trying to sell these guys? Really, what's the matter with them? And, howdy to Becca Boo, a new sub on the channel. Hello and welcome. Hope you guys don't mind my dog jokes, but honestly, maybe there was something to Fëanor and Morgoth's speeches about the Valar. If they would not even just, poof dogs into existence on Númenor and just said, well, we didn't think of it. What is the matter with you? They are pure evil. How could they not?
Probably cat lovers.
Let's not even go there. Yeah, you're welcome, Becca Boo. But anyways, enough about our Valar bashing for being cat lovers. Ugh, cats.
So fickle.
Anyways, it's interesting that Tolkien notes dogs had to be imported. Okay. I'm glad that's a priority. At least we now know he was a dog person. Well, the Rover Random, the fact that he wrote an epic story all about dogs, I think about one dog, I think should be, and given that Huan plays a divine dog, is in some ways the co-hero and co-star to Luthien in the Baron Luthien story, I think that hints at a dog person. Him being a good person. I couldn't resist that joke. I got to stop cracking these jokes. As to any cat people, we've actually had a cat once, sadly. Well, actually, we once had two of them. One of them died as a kitten. The other, we couldn't keep, so that's them. Yeah. Anyways, thus the years passed, and while Middle-earth went backward in light and wisdom faded, the Dunedain dwelt under the protection of the Valar, and in the friendship of the Eldar, and they increased in stature both of mind and body. They got taller. For though this people used to still their own speech, their kings and lords knew and spoke also the elven tongue, which they had learnt in the days of their alliance, and thus they held converse still with the Eldar, whether of Eressëa. Now, Tall Eressëa was the island that was taken west to transport the Eldar in the older days, in the far Eldar days, when the Eldar first marched west to try to reach Valinor. And Ulmo, Lord of the Seas, moved it back and forth, just transporting the elves, before settling it closer to Valinor. And Tall Eressëa is visible from the tallest of peaks in Andunye on the Isle of Westernessy. So obviously the Númenóreans were allowed to visit Tall Eressëa, which is a big deal because it's a short hop from Tall Eressëa to Aman, as we all know from Lord of the Rings. That said, they also like the Westlands of Middle-earth. I suspect the regions that would probably later be Arnor, almost more than any other region. That, as Arnor seemed to be the real prize, since it was where Elendil later established his kingdom, while his sons were given over to them Gondor, or the lands that would later become Gondor. And the lore masters among them learned also the High Eldarin tongue of the Blessed Realm. Okay, so there's a difference between the Elvish tongue of those in the mortal realm and those in the Blessed Realm. Now, I believe it's a case where Sindarin would be spoken in the mortal realm and Quenya in the immortal realm, I believe. Or, well, the Noldorin tongue, I should say. I think. Or, well, either way, the tongue of the Vanyar would speak would probably be, I should probably go with that. Otherwise, I'm in danger of being wrong. So, that's...
I suppose it's a lot like Latin.
Well, yeah. It's a case where the elves have their own kind of ancient tongue, and the Númenórean tongue is really a mixture of a human tongue mixed with the Eldarin tongue, so that you got this new language that comes out, essentially the equivalent of, I would argue that's basically Latin, because you got, now historically you might have, for example, what the, oh shoot, I blanked on them. Shoot, I gotta Google them. But you'd have the Nishite tongue of the Hittites for one thing. They were a previous Indo-European language. And you had rulers of Rome before the Romans. The Etruscans. So I suspect there's a bit of Etruscan within the Latin tongue, although linguists are having a hard time translating Etruscan into a risible language because we don't have a Rosetta Stone to the Etruscan language, and it's completely unrecognizable to the Greek Latin of their neighbors, or even the Gallic languages of the Western neighbors. So there's a problem here. We may have, I hope not, but we may have lost forever one full language with all its literature, all of its secrets, everything. And to an extent, this might sound weird, but everything that is Etruscan is basically lost. Because if we can't understand their language, we can't understand anything about them, is my argument. So yeah, that's a horrifying thought as a historian. So
I hope that
the secret gets cracked. Yeah, same. Now I'm just going to go back to Númenor to an extent. We're not going to really touch on Middle Earth because that's not really important. I'm just going to. Now I finished kind of last time with with a bit of the a study of the geography. But I also wanted to comment on, amusingly, how almost every provincial region has star in its name. Hiarnu star, Hiaro star, Oro star, Foro star, Andu star. Yeah. Although, interestingly, Mitalmar and the Arandor regions do not have star in its name. So that's a little interesting. Next time I do this sort of live stream, I think I'm going to have to look up the meaning of each name. It's a little disrespectful of me towards Tolkien not to know this, so that, when doing this sort of presentation. Now, we get the Bay of Aldana there. Now, I believe in the Rings of Power, Romena and Armenelos really showed up. Romena being the main eastern port city, I should say, of Numenor. Now, it's interesting that at the founding, there's more references to Undunier. So it's interesting because it seems like the gazes of the Numenorians, to an extent, were turned westwards, reverently. Now, you've got, this was the main port from Tol Eressëa. They'd come in through the Bay of Undunier to Undunier. And it was Tar Meneldur who went north here to this region. And it was in the Forostar region that he built a great tower so as to observe the heavens. Part of him did not really want to be king. Now, he was a great and wise and good king. He was. But he preferred to stargaze and build up his library. He was a scholar and an astronomer, not a monarch in some ways. So while he didn't mind his son building up trade, he kind of thought, he was apprehensive about the idea of a commercial empire. And I think there was a wisdom there that he kind of observed that this could end badly. Aldarion understood that there was the threat of Sauron. So this is a complicated issue. Because on the one hand, the Numenorians are in danger of becoming the villains of the story, so to speak, by building up an empire. But on the other hand, people need them. So the way Tolkien builds this up, this is not a black or white issue. And the chat's pleased with how this is a star-shaped island. Yeah, it's pretty cool. What's funny is that I think only Tolkien could have pulled this off. The idea of a star-shaped island, and actually make it seem almost natural. Because I've seen other fantasy authors try it, and it just feels tacked on and weird. But with Tolkien, it works.
I think the people that are most likely to actually successfully do it might actually be children.
I guess, yeah.
They're the only one. Children seems to be the only ones that would take a base shape like that and turn it into a country or a world, because it's something familiar that they know, rather than this entire elaborate landscape.
Well, Tolkien did do the elaborate landscape, but also the little island thing. But
yeah,
he was very imaginative. Oh, no dogs. Cats heaven. Yeah, I just saw that chat comment here. I think. Can I show this? Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I can't even imagine. Sorry. The dog person to me is like, how can you call this a paradise if there's no dogs?
No mice.
Yeah, but what about dogs? Anyways, so yeah. Now, it's interesting because under Aldarion, power seemed to start to shift to Romena, I think, to an extent. At least during his father's reign, because, he was typically probably more over here than he was over there in Armenelos. So he'd be on his ship in Romena. And that's really interesting. Although, at one point he took his bride, Arendis, on a romantic cruise around the island to Undunier. She wasn't much of a seafarer. She didn't really like the sea and declared Uinen, the Lady of the Sea, her enemy. pretty staunch statement.
No kidding. You're an island surrounded by water.
She loved trees and forest and flowers, but her husband loved chopping down trees to build up his boats, and basically pretty much told her, all right, name me one tree that you don't want me to cut and I won't cut it. Well, I like them all. Well, too bad. I want to build my boats. Suck it up, honey. Essentially, that was his attitude. It was not a good marriage. It was...
They sound like they had nothing in common.
They didn't really. Except for the fact that she loved him.
I can't even.
Well, wait till you read the story. It's very complicated. It's... Yeah, Tara and Kanita has a good point. Bet she got seasick. That probably plays a large role in her hardening her stance against the sea. Sadly. Speaking personally, I love the sea. I don't always like being on boats, although the last time I went on a boat, I had a blast. So I don't know how I feel about boats. I just like being in water, swimming, and I love just sitting by the sea.
There's a certain amount of peace that comes with it.
Yeah. So, like, speaking personally, I don't... Like, on an intellectual level, I understand where she's coming from. But on a personal level, I'm kind of like, I don't get it. On the other hand, I don't think Aldarian is handling her possessiveness of him very well. He's basically feeding on her insecurities, and that's not helping matters. How did this become the story of the mariner's wife? How did I say that? Oh, and Becca Boo. I really like cats. Okay, that's fine. Like we mentioned, we once had 2 cats. One of them died to a coyote. Sadly, the kitten, and the other one thought it was a dog, so it was a perfect cat.
There were barn cats.
Yeah. Anyways, pets are like one's children. They're perfect in your eyes, no matter what. Now, well, not that I think that's wise for parents to regard their kids that way, but with pets, it's easy to regard them as perfect. Now, that said, Armenelos the Golden is the capital of Numenor, as we all know. And it's here that the great citadel of Elros was built. Now, I don't know whether the citadel got much attention in the Rings of Power series. I honestly don't. I haven't seen it. But I do remember that I think they had a picture of Romena, where they showed what seemed to me to be a large Argonaut statue of Elros. And it would, remember that picture of Romena, like of the port city? It looked great.
Yeah.
Like, we were not impressed by those trailers, at least in terms of, we were not attracted to the show, but let's be honest, the visuals did look great. They did look impressive.
I can't deny that.
I will even say the costumes looked really great.
Oh yeah.
Like give the devil his due. Like, it was a great looking show. Becca Boo, they couldn't really divorce. All right, here, I'll go for the chat comments one at a time. The thing is, it depends. Now, it's been a while since I read The Nature of Middle-earth, where Tolkien discussed marriages of the different societies. I'll have to look that up for next time. And the thing is, it depends. If they swore an ordinary marriage, they might be able to dissolve it, although Arendis would be disgraced, as might her daughter. And I think Aldarion was a little sensitive about disgracing Ankhalime and traumatizing his daughter more than he already has, to an extent. On the other hand, if they swore their marriage before Eru Iluvatar, they can't divorce. They're stuck with each other. So, in that regard,
they need someone like Jerry Springer.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here. I see the Fall of Numenor book is out next week. I also saw the new Silmarillion illustrated edition this week at Barnes & Noble. Didn't get it, though. Next paycheck. Yeah. We don't really... There's no bookstore in our town that we live in right now, sadly. This is one major reason why I'm wanting to get out because of this place, because, well... Anyways. But on the other hand, yeah, it's... The new Silmarillion, the illustrated one, Nerd of the Rings showed me some pictures of it, and it looks great. Looks great. I really appreciate him posting and sharing some of that. But as to the Fall of Numenor, yeah, it's out next week, but it's out on Kindle already. So I'm about halfway through the Kindle edition, and I'm going to be doing a video later this week all about it, and basically doing an epic fantasy review of it. But I'm thinking, I was originally thinking we would do a series of live streams on it, but I'm kind of thinking we're already overanalyzing the Akallabeth. Well, maybe I'll kind of mix text from both and do a cross analysis between them next time. Though that said, that's jumping a little ahead, as Dan and I are analyzing Silmarillion together in the Silmarillion podcast. So, yeah, but I don't like jumping ahead like that, but it is what it is. And you know what? There is a lot of great text and stuff and lore to discuss about the Second Age. And since the Second Age is what people are really wanting to, I guess, see, what with the Rings of Power series, we have to do content on that, which, not complaining too much, there's a lot of great stuff from the Second Age. All right. I have an 18-year-old cat and a 10-month-old dog. Aw. That cat, wow, good on you having an 18-year-old pet like that. Cool. Did you actually raise that? As for a 10-month-old dog, oh, they're a handful at 10 months old. My cat is 15. She's beautiful. My last cat was 14 when he passed. I'm sorry to hear. When our kitten passed, he was only a few months old. Actually, no, he probably like only 2 months old, maybe.
Yeah.
We've mostly had dogs, and well, whenever one of them passed, oh my gosh, there was a pall over the family, the entire family. I think sometimes we just go almost a year without wanting to talk about the dog. Sometimes we'd over talk about him, then we'd just be like, like we'd be mourning almost for a year. Like it's a big deal in our family. So yeah, I definitely understand some of what you're feeling there, Becca. Boo. The loss of a pet is... I'm very sorry you've had to go through that. I'm very sorry for you. But at least you have your beautiful 15-year-old cat. Good on you for still getting a cat, even after losing one. That's good. That's interesting. I thought divorce would be frowned upon. That's a shame. Yeah, it is frowned upon. I don't think in the Legendarium there's a single divorce. The closest one comes to a divorce is Finwë with Miriel, which we all know how well that turned out for everyone involved. That was a disaster. Remember that?
Yes.
And then we got Indus, whom I would argue was a better wife for Finwë overall, and was probably a more devoted woman. The trouble is, well, it messed up Fëanor big time. Man, was Fëanor messed up by what happened between mom and dad, so to speak. Oh no, is that? I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Sorry about your cat, Becca. Very kind of Spectre there. We've pretty much run out of text, and the fact that we're talking about cats and dogs at this point, I think we've moved a little far away from Tolkien there.
I think so too.
Interestingly, he doesn't seem to have liked cats, because cats are depicted with villains. Like there's the one lady with all her black cats who'd spy on people within the capital of Gondor. And there's some images of her in art form, and she's utterly spooky. I honestly hope that the next Tolkien book is one that places more emphasis on the Third Age. You know, like where we get all the notes of Tolkien about the Third Age, like the Rohirrim, in one book. Maybe like what I'd like to see is that if they could find enough notes and enough of the text to do something on the Rohirrim and a separate book on Arnor and Gondor. And maybe also about the dwarves and elves, of course, with Arnor and Gondor. But I suspect it'll all be compiled into one book. But either way, I'd like to see if maybe Tolkien did end up writing more on the various dynasties and on the various major figures of the Third Age, like he did the First and Second Ages. I don't know if that's a weird thought, but I really hope there are more notes. Like what I wouldn't give to have access to that archive of Tolkien's.
That would be a toy store.
Yeah, I don't think they'd ever hire us though for the Tolkien estate. Yeah, she did have one white one, I think, and used them to spy for. Yeah. She's a very creepy character, although she's also a reference to medieval folklore about witches and witchcraft.
And I also can't help but think that it's a shadow form of Bastet from Egyptian mythology, because
Bastet was a protective deity. Sekhmet could be at times, but Sekhmet was really the shadow to Bastet in some ways.
And cats were noted to be protectors, particularly of children.
In the underworld.
So the cat would be spying for Bastet for that in the event that she needed to protect.
But that said, in Tolkien's Legendarium, cats are bad.
Yeah.
Dogs are probably the more trustworthy ones, given Huan's role.
Yep.
It's interesting that he doesn't really use dogs in the Second and Third Age too much. He references that dogs had to be imported into Numenor, but he doesn't make reference to, I think, almost any dogs in the Third Age. And given that the Rangers of what was once Arnor tend to be living in the wild, I'm surprised they don't really have their own small pack of dogs to assist them. Because, like, for example, when Aragorn is living out in the wilderness, I'm surprised he doesn't have like a dog or two to keep watch for him and, safeguard him when he needs to sleep. But then again, I kind of imagine Aragorn as being a bit like Musashi. If someone were to sneak up on him, he'd be up in a heartbeat, sword in hand or bow in hand, and ready to fight. You'd think the Numenorians would have ship cats. Actually, strangely, I could almost see that with the Numenorians.
They had very important roles because...
Well, I'm also saying that as a reference to some of the Egyptian connections with Numenor, as well as them slowly turning into villains. And I'm just saying the cats are linked to villains in Tolkien's lore, because they are, and that would be a nod to the Numenorians getting corrupted. And, okay, cats are my spirit animal. Okay, interesting fact, Beckaboo. There are some wild wolves in Tolkien's Legendarium. There's the one that tears off the hand of Beren and devours a Silmaril, Karkaroth, I think it is. He's a rather terrifying figure in the Legendarium. Then you've got, I think, a group of wild wolves mad wolves, I should say, that rush into the Shire in the Third Age during one of the Fell Winters. And Gandalf and the Rangers have to chase them away to save the hobbits. Oh, here's a really interesting question from Terra Incognita. I really like this question. When do you think we're going to get a young Aragorn series or movie? As if the way you phrase that, Terra, is very interesting. It's as though you think that it's inevitable that we get a young Aragorn one, series or movie. And given that we've gotten a Conan live-action TV series, Dan and I are watching it for the channel, and that feels terrible.
We've got some pretty sadistic fans
amongst our Conan fans, but we love them nonetheless. So that makes us masochists. But that said, this phrasing is very fascinating to me. So when do you think we're going to get it? I've actually never thought about that. Now, I don't think you checked out my analysis of what Netflix would have done had they gotten their hands on the rights to Tolkien's Legendarium, and they were talking about a young Aragorn series. And the idea of a young Aragorn series or young Aragorn movie is okay. I'm not going to lie; it's an interesting idea.
We did probably have to wait until he shows up
in a spin-off series from the Rings of Power, but that's years away. When would they see it? When we see it? Okay, so the thing is, this all depends because it seems like the Tolkien estate is they're focusing more on the appendixes right now. And Simon Tolkien had a lot of involvement in the Rings of Power TV series. And it seems that if he had a lot of involvement in it, I think that means there is a keenness to explore on the big screen the Legendarium that on the part of the Tolkien estate, because Simon is currently the head. But this is a very good question. And she's giggling there in the chat. She stumped me. I'm going to be honest. I don't think we're going to see it this decade because it seems like Amazon has 5 seasons planned. I don't know if they're going to be doing it every 2 years or if it's 2 years till like 2024 when they're going to showcase the next season, season 2, and then they're going to go to 2025 when they show the next one after that, and then the next couple of years. But if they stretch it out for the rest of the decade, oh yeah, I don't know much either, Terra Incognita, about who has the rights. Sorry, I didn't think that question would come up, so I didn't actually do any research on it. I'm actually going to have to do research on this topic so that I can do a video on this, because I've done one of the timeline of Tolkien's Legendarium of his writings. I need to write this down. I'm going to write this down because this is a very, very interesting question, and it merits its own video because one second, because I can't answer to that, Tara, but I will say this. I think that it'll either be, I think we might actually see in the 2030s or 2040s, definitively an Aragorn series or movie.
Aragorn would need to come up a lot more, and that's why
I think that because Amazon's mentioned they'd love to do everything right up to Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, which I suspect means they're preparing for their own adaptation. And if that's the case, I could see them wanting to do something with Aragorn. I think we will be seeing in the 2030s or 2040s. Though, yeah, it does feel inevitable the way franchises are going. I think we're going to probably see a Gandalf and Aragorn series or movies, probably movie trilogies if they're done in movie format. And I think that what we're going to see is that this Netflix idea, now the article said that the Tolkien estate was a little wigged out about it, but I think that Amazon's going to look at that and say, I'm going to take that idea. Because from a business perspective and a commercial perspective, it's a brilliant idea. From a artistic point of view, I kind of think it's not a great idea, because it's a matter that what story can you tell other than the hunt for Golem? And
there'd be a lot of artistic liberties that they need to take.
yeah, that said, I do think it's inevitable. Now, I'm not going to say that like off the hop it's going to be terrible if they do that. No, like who could tell? Like maybe with a good writing staff, a good set of actors, maybe they could do something great. But I think there's a good fan film called The Hunt for Golem. I've not seen it. I've seen it come up in my recommendations on YouTube, but I've not actually ever seen it. I thought about it, but up until this flu, I was kind of like, I'm not watching fan films. Then I sat down and watched a set of Friday the 13th fan films, and from there I started watching some Halloween and Scream fan films and other horror ones. So that I had seen one fantasy fan film I liked years ago. It was a French one. Of course, it was French, but I was not inclined towards English or American fan films. But now, after seeing those horror ones and slasher ones, I'm very much inclined towards watching Hunt for Golem and Born of Hope. But yeah, give him a dog, instant success. Yes, Terra Incognita. If they give him a friendly, furry sidekick, I will watch that show and movie. I will watch every episode or whatever, and I will do a shot-for-shot analysis of every scene with that dog.
But that would mean Aragorn would be the sidekick.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. As to Becca Boo, she ended up saying, I'd love to see a Aragorn film. I'd love an Aragorn film. That would be great. Yeah, it could be really good. Though, I think The Hunt for Golem essentially is a Aragorn flick. I think. I've not seen it. I haven't read the summary. I don't know. So maybe you should consider taking a look at that, Becca Boo. And in hindsight, maybe we should at some point watch that and do a review of that. Oh, and of course, there is a romance angle with Arwen too. Yes, that would have to be involved in an Aragorn movie because, yeah, weirdly, I could see a sequel movie to Lord of the Rings involving Aragorn in his last, about Aragorn's last days, because there's a bit of drama there where Arwen is grieving and is going, now I kind of understand what drove the Númenóreans and what pushed them to want to venture west. And Aragorn kind of sees that as almost blasphemous and is like, no, I am letting go of life willingly and happily. I have lived a good, long life. I've done enough. Because, she wants him to continue clinging to life because she loves him and she doesn't want to be without him. And he sees it as, no, like, you got to let go, honey.
I've made my peace.
And I'm happy. This is how it's meant to be. And so I think that you can make a drama, something with maybe a similar tone to the Robert the Bruce movie from 2019, or even the what was that movie? But you need or even like Shawshank to an extent, just in this not dark tone, but this sorrowful tone. Because it's a sorrowful event that Aragorn is dying, and it'd have to be about his last days. Honestly, if I was a director or scriptwriter, I'd probably want to do that. Link didn't work. It was a Critical Dragons page. What link? But yeah, I think that would probably be able to work. You could make a great drama about that, and maybe even bring in Aragorn's son and other children as characters, and where you have this kind of character drama of his son trying to come up with he's struggling with the idea that, can I measure up to dad? No. But he actually does a great job as king, apparently, according to the legendarium and the epilogue in the appendixes and whatnot. As to Arwen, it's about her making her peace and, with Aragorn's death. So you'd probably have to have Aragorn's death, but then you need another half hour or something for afterwards to maybe 40 minutes. So that he'd have to die maybe at the halfway point, and then you continue on. But, or have him die in the last, like right before the last 20 minutes of the film. Something like that. I think it could be done. It would need to be a more emotional, cerebral journey. Maybe the director from the Lion in Winter movie from 2003.
I think that he'd be able to pull something great out of it.
Yeah, I'd choose probably that director. Or, this might sound weird, but Angus, I think it's, what's his name? The actor of Robert the Bruce from the Robert the Bruce movie. I think if you were to get him as screenplay writer and maybe as director, because I think he wrote and directed his flick, I think he could do a good job with a Aragorn movie in the Fourth Age. That said, for a prequel movie of Aragorn in his prime, it essentially have to be the Hunt for Gollum story, I think. Either that or the Fell Winter. Okay, maybe we spoke too hastily earlier. Maybe the Fell Winter could be a good story. Oh, wait, I think that was before Aragorn's time. Well, there is the time when he was Thorondor, I think it was, captain of Gondor. So maybe you could make a flick about that, now that I think about it. But that one would be a bit of a political drama, interestingly, and more military drama. It'd almost have to have a tone like Conan the Barbarian in some ways, because Aragorn's really in the thicket of things and in the combat, but it's only that and maybe the Hunt for Gollum you can do with Aragorn. So,
or the Hunt for Gollum, we could probably the director behind Season of the Witch.
I guess, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's if you wanted something more horror-based. Okay.
And I think Aragorn could fit in that.
Now, Tara Incognita just voiced, get Viggo back to play old Aragorn in like 10 years. Now, I was not very fond of Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn in the Lord of the Rings movies. Now, that's a known fact about me. But him playing old Aragorn, I think, would be pretty cool. And Viggo Mortensen, I always thought was a great actor. Oh, him as Sigmund Freud. He played him with such pathos. Yeah, maybe get him to play Aragorn, old man Aragorn. And maybe as a frame narrative, if you have two back-to-back stories about Aragorn, one during his captain days for Gondor, and then one for the Hunt for Gollum, with old man Aragorn looking back on those, and then you have the old man Aragorn story as the third in the trilogy, where it circumnavigates around Lord of the Rings, and then you have Lord of the Rings in the middle. I think this could work. Okay, I know I said at first, like, I'm not sure, but now I'm like, yeah, this could actually work. But you'd actually need something like a rescue mission for Aragorn or something like during his captain days, because you need some sort of big event. And it also needs to be personal, so maybe it'd have to be something like, I don't know, the rescue of a little girl just out of the goodness of his heart. And it's like, not someone connected to Aragorn or anything, just a random little girl, and Aragorn ventures off with a small group to go, like a bit like Centurion, to go rescue a kid or something. And you got the trouble of Denethor and whatnot, his growing jealousy of Aragorn. So you could have this sort of plot. Oh, we got the pitch. Yeah, sorry about that, Terra Incognita. Sorry. How did this become about adaptations? This is your fault, Tara. This is your fault. But let me see. Now, Spectre, though. Are the Hobbits and Lord of the Rings the only things canon with Tolkien, with his other works being published after his death? Okay, canon's an interesting concept of Tolkien. There's a lot of... canon is something that a lot of people debate about, bicker about endlessly. Now, generally, the idea is that most of the story is a compilation of notes and legends compiled by Bilbo Baggins, Frodo Baggins, and Samwise Gamgee, as well as Meriadoc, Brandybuck, and Pippin Peregrine Took, along with some notes having been given over by scholars from Gondor and Rivendell. That said, as to the main books to read, we have a reading order of the books of the Lord of the Rings Legendarium, but everything outside of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was published posthumously to Tolkien. Now, in the definitive timeline video, I go over that, and the interesting thing is that some stories were, like, a lot of the stories were published in the Unfinished Tales, Lost Tales, and Silmarillion, but then some of them got repackaged into the three great epics of the First Age. That is to say, Turin Turambar, or Story of the Children of Húrin. You have Beren and Luthien, and you have the Fall of Gondolin. So you got a lot of stories. I hope this answers your question. As to what I consider personally canon, I do consider all the events of the Silmarillion to be canon. There are some who say no, they don't. And that's a very interesting point of view. I don't agree with it, but I'm like, wow. No, like, huh. No, like, I'd love to hold a debate with someone who's more skeptical of it one day. That'd be fascinating.
Personally, I think we should go with Christopher Tolkien's opinion.
Yeah,
he's the one that really helped
flesh out and put together everything.
Yeah, put things in order.
Yeah. So, hope that answers the question. We got here from saying Aragorn should have a dog. My brain went a boy and his dog, Aragorn, young Aragorn show. Yes, it was. So it's actually our fault. Shoot. Anyways, yeah. I guess an Aragorn trilogy could work. You know, like if you have his captaining days, the hunt for Gollum, alongside Gandalf, and then Old Man Aragorn's death. Yeah, I guess that could work. And Arwen could be a consistent character in all three. That'd be interesting. And we might even get Elrond's sons in there. They were, I think, missing from the Lord of the Rings movie.
So, that would be interesting.
Yeah, and I really like them. And they're all, although they play a pretty large role in LOTR, Lord of the Rings Online. So
really?
Yeah. They're quest givers. So
maybe once I learn a bit more about all the lore, I might be able to appreciate the game.
Yeah, although at the point where I'm at, it's feeling a little long with a lot of fetch quests and whatnot. But it's good for just shooting the breeze and discussing a bit of the French translation of Lord of the Rings, which I'm considering at some point after we get the first French video up and running, which is still being edited. It started off at about 40 to 50 minutes long, so it's a beast. Once I edit that, maybe we'll start doing a side-by-side translation comparison. Because Adon Tolkien, Tolkien's greatest grandson, the greatest son of Christopher, who's really followed in Christopher's footsteps, is one of the main masterminds behind getting the team that translated the French, the entire Legendarium into French. So if we could do just side-by-side comparisons and linguistic analysis, that'd be pretty fun down the road. But as to this movie idea, maybe we'll have to make actual videos on this, detailing what kind of stories we'd want to tell if we were movie makers. That might be something to actually do.
We've got an idea of several fields that we could go for some of the different adventures.
Yeah. I'm going to write this down. I have to write this down, otherwise I'll forget. Although I don't know if I could do better at coming up with ideas for a hunt for Gollum idea. Because honestly, like the trailer for it looked pretty good.
It's what I immediately thought of Season of the Witch. Something a bit more horror-based.
Okay, because you're thinking that the trailer looked too light. Yeah, it does look pretty cheerful and light for the most part.
And
Maybe
we're talking about Golem who wants the ring. This is not something good.
Yeah, okay.
It's like your usual adventure story. It's fine, but
maybe we should see it before we actually judge how they did it.
That sounds like a plan.
Yeah, we'll have to watch and review that at some point. Let us know in the comment section if that would be something you guys would want. As it is, my throat is starting to really ache. I'm still trying to get over this flu, and I'm feeling exhausted. My brain is shutting down. This was a fun exercise. I honestly didn't think this discussion would go for this long or in this direction. So we ended up over-analyzing the Silmarillion, discussing adaptations as well as the sum. Wow, this was quite the stream. We really just didn't really fully plan this. We just went by the seat of our pants, so to speak. En tout cas, if you enjoyed this stream, I hope, and if you're watching this long after the stream, I do hope that you'll smash that like button, as it'll help boost this video / stream. And I do hope that you also, if you were entertained and learned something new or just generally appreciated this discussion, that you and Dan's really beautiful reading of the fifth letter, that you smash that subscribe button to stay tuned for our next video. You guys are all the very best, my friends. And everyone in this chat really made this video possible.
Thank you, guys. I agree. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And, well, once again, happy Remembrance Day. And I hope everyone remains very, very healthy and happy in the coming days. So,
au revoir.